Hi folks, and welcome to the next edition of Infection Control Matters. Slightly different podcast today, and probably a bit of a shorter one, but we're going to talk about a study that didn't happen. So I'd like to introduce to you somebody who you all know very well, Professor Brett Mitchell, who's joined us, and I'd also like to invite Dr. Kate Browne to the microphone as well. So welcome both.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
So the study that we're going to talk about is called Preventing Catheter-Associated Urinary Tract Infections, a randomized double-blind crossover study. And it was abbreviated to CAUTI, which is a pretty cool sort of study name. So Brett, tell us about the study and the background and what you did to get it up.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And before we forget, actually, we must remember the Kate to explain the cation, because that was a clever little abbreviation. Look, a few years ago, we did a trial evaluating chlorhexidine versus saline for urethral or meatal cleaning prior to urinary catheter insertion. It was indwelling urinary catheter insertion. And we did a stepwise randomized control trial. We found that the use of chlorhexidine 0.1% was associated with a significant reduction in CAUTIs, catheter-associated urinary tract infections, and also a reduction in catheter-associated asymptomatic bacteria, and that study and that intervention was cost effective. There were some limitations with that study, but we won't bother about that today. But after that study was published, I actually got contacted by a number of people from the community who self-catheterise. And they contacted me and said, I get lots of UTIs. Will this study work for me? And it got me wondering that there's a lot of motivated people in terms of trying to improve their own health. And this must be a problem if people are contacting researchers to look at this. So I then, with you, Phil, and others, started to embark on exploring this issue a bit more. And Phil, we did a systematic review and meta-analysis, and we found that there are a lot of people who undertake intermittent catheterisation, around 20,000 in Australia every year, and that on average, people are getting about 2 urinary tract infections a year. And about 70% of people who do intermittent catheterizations will get frequent UTIs. So we realized this is a bit of a problem. We did another study, Phil, and we interviewed patients about their experience with healthcare-associated infections, including UTIs. And then we tried to get money to do a trial. And we tried many different grant applications, and we had many unsuccessful grant applications to different bodies. Fast forward a little bit, and I managed to get some money as part of an investigator grant that I've got, and decided to pursue this trial. And this trial was aimed at comparing chlorhexidine versus saline for meatal cleaning in people who self-catheterise to see if it reduced the incidence of UTIs. These are people in the community, and it was a double-blind crossover RCT. So we had 2 products made, and they looked identical. One had saline, one had chlorhexidine, both colourless, both the same weight, and we really couldn't tell the difference. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now.
I must declare I was also an investigator on this trial as well. So Kate, tell us what the study planned to do. What was the plan?
Well, first of all, I was so excited, and still am, to be a part of this study. Brett mentioned before about the name of the study. Anyone who follows your research knows that you guys like to get creative with the names. And I think I had a bit of a say in the name for this one. In a past life, I actually came from a chemistry lab where I was working with cationic antimicrobials. Chlorhexidine is actually a cationic compound. So the cation, incorporating the catheter-associated urinary tract infections, works very well for this study. And as anyone who's had a UTI before knows, they're not fun. And when I was talking with our participants when we were getting this study started, to get a little bit more background information about people in the community who self-catheterize every single day, and their experiences were honestly quite horrific. They were telling me some of them were at the very end of their options for antibiotic treatment, and they were just told there's nothing else we can do. So I think particularly for our participants who these UTIs disproportionately affect, I was really excited to see what this study could tell us. And I think, like the rest of the study team, a little bit disappointed that we couldn't get it over the line. So what we had planned to do was expand on the previous research with using chlorhexidine as a skin prep. We were looking at a different setting. So these participants were in their own homes. They weren't in hospitals. There were a different cohort of participants, in their own homes, undertaking intermittent daily catheterization rather than the indwelling catheters we find a lot in hospitals. And like Brett said, there's no research really into this community, which is tens of thousands of people in Australia. So what we had planned to do was our double-blind trial. So I didn't know which of my participants were allocated to the control or the intervention. The plan was to do the study in 6-month blocks. The participants would be exposed to both of the control wipes, and then in the next 6-month block, the chlorhexidine as the intervention. And because it was double-blind, I didn't know which participant would start with the control or start with the chlorhexidine. I think this study design is really good because it allows each participant to have access to the intervention rather than some trials where some participants are only allocated to the control. So they may not get the benefit that we're trying to see with our study design for CAUTI.
So how many participants did you set out to recruit? What was required for the study?
So we did plan our study based on some statistical calculation. We needed enough participants so that we could see a difference, but we needed a feasible sample size that wasn't thousands of people that we had to enroll in the study. So those calculations led us to a minimum sample size of 32, and we were aiming for about 40 participants over the 12-month study to help allow for anyone that, couldn't complete the entire 12 months, that we'd still meet that minimum sample size.
So where were these people going to be? How are we going to get the materials to them, and what were some of the logistics planning behind the study?
We actually had participants enrolled all the way across Australia, from home in Sydney to me, all the way up to Perth in the Northern Territory, Queensland, Victoria. It was quite a logistical challenge to be able to get fast access to all of our participants and mail them a yearly supply of these wipes. So luckily we have a really good research team and we had really good planning on how to do this. But it was a very big consideration. There was a lot of time spent packaging these equipment, a lot of cost to express post these across Australia, considering that the parcels were quite large for a lot of participants.
Most of them got about a month or so supply, didn't they, at a time, just to try and not overwhelm them.
Some participants who catheterized more often than others, and they needed 2 big parcels so that they had sufficient wipes for a month.
So how many wipes would they be getting? How big is a parcel? How many wipes in a parcel? Just curious.
A parcel was a handful. You definitely wouldn't want to be walking that one home from the post office too often. They were quite heavy and a bit bulky.
Okay.
But we didn't want to send too many at once because otherwise where do you store them?
Yeah. I think they were that extra large sort of satchel type bags that you get from the post office, but they were stuffed full. So, pretty big. Because, as Kate mentioned, some people need it up to 6 or 8 times a day to be self-catheterizing. And then at the lower ends, we have participants who might catheterize, once, twice a day. So
people who self-catheterize might not be all that easy to find. Kate and Brett, what was the recruitment plan at the outset?
I might start, and then Kate's going to go into some really good detail. The idea initially was we have a couple of clinics to recruit through, so continence-related clinics and a urology-based clinic, and also use professional support groups and or companies that post out urinary catheters to individuals. So that was our main strategy. And I guess I'll let Kate talk about all the strategies, but I guess those two were insufficient. And perhaps, Kate, do you want to go through all the different strategies and then we can pick out which ones we want to talk about a bit more?
Yeah. So anyone that knows me knows that I like to have a plan B. For this study, we had plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And unfortunately, all of our backup plans still weren't enough to get it over the line. As Brett mentioned, plan A, we had 2 urology clinics in Australia that we submitted ethics and governance applications for these 2 sites. And anyone who's ever submitted ethics or governance knows just how much time and effort goes into these applications. We also had our study website, and I got a few stats there if I can go into how many people we actually had looking at the website. 1,500 views to the website, which was 894 unique visitors. So we had quite a few eyes on the website. Our top 3 referrals to the website were from Facebook, search engine, and Twitter, or if Elon Musk is listening to the podcast, we call that one X. So that was our plan B, and we were really promising with, the clinics who see these people every day. Our website was getting a lot of views, but it was kind of at this point in recruitment that we knew that plan A and B weren't going to be enough.
So how many numbers were you getting in, Kate, at this early stage? Were you being flooded with participants? Or
2 months into the study recruitment phase, we had 1 participant.
1 participant after 2 months.
1 participant had been enrolled in the study at this point.
That's tough.
It was tough. So, we're robust. We thought, what else can we do? Brett had a really good idea to engage a professional marketing company. So we actually launched these ads on Meta, so Facebook or Instagram, which was paid advertising. And we worked with them to design an ad that would advertise what our study was about to a lot of different people. And then once we had a specific subset of people engaged, it would then focus on similar people. Our plan there was to cast a really big net and then actually advertise the study to the people that we wanted to get the message to.
All the algorithms to do their work.
Yeah. For lots of different reasons, this wasn't enough to get us over the line. We did get a total of 80 people reach out through these Facebook ads. And so they knew that the study was about self-catheterising to prevent UTIs. A lot of people after that initial reach out never responded to any of my email, so there was no further contact. And we had a total of 7 people enrolled through our big net that we cast online. We had other things in the background. Plan B was our newspaper and magazine advertising. So front page of a local newsletter. We had a really big ad about the study. We had online magazines from suppliers of catheters. We reached out to numerous professional organisations as our plan E. And I'd just like to say a really big shout out to Andrea from Chronic UTI Australia. You were amazing. You were really responsive and you really wanted to help. There were a lot of other organisations that did not want to have anything to do with this.
What was happening with the clinics? Were they not recruiting?
The short answer is we didn't get many, as Kate alluded to. And it's difficult to know, when you're not working in those scenarios yourself, it's hard to know the best way to engage. There were investigators, associate investigators and leads in different clinics. So, those flyers and information were being handed out to potential participants and we didn't get any bites. So I guess that's one thing at the end we might think about what we would do differently, but that might be one thing. I guess the other sort of strategy that Kate alluded to there was sort of the professional associations. And about probably 18 months before we started the trial, we thought we had a really solid relationship with a person who was in a key role in an organisation and could help in multiple ways. And we actually thought that alone would be enough for this study. That person left their employment, new person came in, and then started to build up that relationship, and that person left as well. And that really fell over. And we ended up with, I don't think any people recruited that we know of, Kate, did we, from that? So, and that I think was probably going to be our main, I thought personally at the start, that could actually be our main source of recruitment. And so, that was really disappointing. We've invested a lot of time in that. And it just shows the value of interpersonal relationships, but also the fragility of those. And if that falls over, like history is lost, you start from scratch again. And some people might or may not be interested in pursuing what someone else has been previously interested in. So, yeah, I guess that was one of the biggest, for me, actually, that was probably the thing that, more so than anything else, that I thought would be the main source of our recruitment, and was the biggest source of disappointment for me.
So after 1 month, after 2 months, there was one recruited participant. After all these efforts and paying a third party to do the advertising for you, that big recruitment plan strategy, that has resulted in 7 more participants being recruited.
We actually, after 6 months of recruitment, reached half of our minimum sample size. So we had 16 people who had been officially enrolled in the study. But there was a problem at that 6 month of recruitment mark, because the wipes that we were using as a part of the study only had 12 months left on their expiry date. And as the study goes for 12 months, we were in a little bit of a pickle. We only had half of the sample size, but no more time left to recruit.
So that time pressure was important. Yeah, sorry.
Time pressure. The time pressure was important, Phil. And also we were concurrently trying to get extension for the expiry. We actually think that those wipes would be fine for another year or two potentially. And probably, the testing so far has indicated that's the case. So, but we were in this dilemma because we weren't recruiting enough. And I guess the other thing, Kate, would be we saw sort of peaks and troughs, but there was a really long trough towards the end of that 6 month period. So I think we got to about 4 months, and Phil, you were involved in these discussions with the CIs as well, with Kate and myself, about, do we continue this trial? And we gave ourselves KPIs to meet. We met some early on, and then we didn't meet the next one. But we decided, let's pursue it for another month. And what would you say, Kate? For that 6 to 8 weeks, there was no more recruitment pretty much, or it certainly plateaued. And we kind of felt we were flogging a dead horse.
In that last month where we threw everything we could, we just didn't reach the numbers that we needed.
So we were left then, Phil, with the unenvious job of calling this part of the study off. To be honest, it was really tough decision. And this is, I guess, where Kate and myself were really invested in this. Kate built up a great rapport with participants, and they shared stories with her. And for me, this has been years in the making. And, it was all the background work, the setting up databases, flow, randomization processes. There's so much behind the scenes work that goes on. And all that was so seamless. Like, Kate did an amazing job with Peter Tian and Georgia Madison to get this, just this seamless process once people were interested and eventually enrolled. And that side of it was just working so well. And it was really difficult. And so, that's why you have teams who can help make these decisions, because I felt I was invested in it emotionally. Kate can speak for herself, but yeah.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking to have to tell our participants that we tried absolutely everything we could, but we just couldn't continue the study as we had planned.
So you had participants already conducting the trial, hadn't you, using the products or not using the products? Who knows what the blinded situation was, but they were using the products.
We did have.
Curious, was there any issues with the products, or with the people who had started the trial? Was that going well, that part of it?
Yeah, the trial was going well. We had a mixed response about the use of the wipes. A lot of people said they're amazing. They're easy to open. I can take them with me. And then we did have some other participants who said, oh, sometimes I struggled with the dexterity of wipes.
You can imagine they were like a foiled wrapper. That's probably the size, a bit bigger than like an alcohol wipe wrapper that you might find. They contain 2 wipes in there. And they needed to be the aluminium type foil because we wanted to make sure that they were sterile, and they were sterile saline and sterile chlorhexidine. So, but look, those kind of things were the things we're also going to evaluate as part of the trial. We had the plan to evaluate when people got UTIs, what impact that had on their quality of life, and do that in a quantitative way. We're also going to do that in a qualitative way. We're also going to do product evaluations throughout the trial. So it was a lot bigger than just the RCT component.
So you've put years of work into this, expended quite a bit of money. There's been volumes of human resources used up. Hard decision to call it quits. To step back and
it still hurts. It
still
really
hurts.
still hurts. It's still raw to me. I don't know about you, Kate, but
we'll refer you to some counselling services at the end of the podcast, bro.
We did have some discussions amongst the team that at what point is it unethical to continue if we don't know if we're going to be if we're not able to answer the research question, should we continue the 12 months trial?
And that was really the line in the sand, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We just couldn't put our hand in our heart and say we will definitely, or more than likely, even get to the required number of participants, even with the product expiry extension. And therefore, are we putting people through a trial that is futile? And when we came to that point, we had no choice but to make that decision to stop.
All right. So I guess the big question then is, on reflection, what do you think you would have done differently that might have improved the potential for it to be completed?
I would preface whatever our sponsors are to this to say that the kitchen sink was thrown at this. And so we continue to rack our brains about what else could we do. I guess, one thing, perhaps not putting eggs in all your one basket, as I perhaps personally thought about with really thinking about clinics and a professional association drive and support networks for people who are self-catheterise. Put a lot of faith in that, and so maybe more due diligence. But whether that would have changed, I don't know. Describe the circumstances, for example, as to why some of those things didn't work. But I don't know, Kate. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I really thought about this when we were trying to recruit towards those end months, about why is it so difficult to recruit 30 people when we know that tens of thousands of people in the community self-catheterize. And I had a few considerations as to why this study was difficult. Our eligibility criteria was that people had to self-catheterize for 12 months or more. So these people are very long-term self-catheterizers. We were also looking for people who do this daily. As I was speaking to a few participants that were interested, they didn't meet the eligibility criteria for this study. So that's a few people that weren't eligible. There were other people who were hesitant to enroll in a clinical trial. A lot of these participants had a lot going on in their personal lives. And then some people were just unreliable with the technology, access to emails and internet to complete the monthly surveys. But I think the biggest reason this study was difficult is that we just weren't reaching the right people at the right time. And when I was talking to a few of our participants about how we could in the future, get the right information to the right people, they said, when I went to my urology clinic, they weren't aware of this study. I mentioned it to my local GP and they weren't aware of this study. I think it's an easy thing to say that we need to be reaching out to more clinics, more GPs, but then the feasibility of that is just not possible. We spent months doing ethics applications and governance applications for 2 sites. The amount of paperwork and signatures and honorary appointments involved with just 2 sites was, quite frankly, a little bit overwhelming. So to do that for every urology clinic in Australia, every GP clinic in Australia, to reach the people we needed to reach, it just wasn't feasible for our relatively small but powerful study team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kate. You know, most studies are done in a fixed environment like a hospital or a particular unit or department or ICU departments across multiple hospitals through clinical networks. So they're slightly easier to do when talking about some of those logistical things. When you're talking about a study that cuts across primary care in so many different ways, as well as secondary care, it's just not feasible to go to so many different health organisations in multiple states to get governance approvals to say, I might recruit one person from your district or region. And so I think there's a lot to be thought about in terms of how can we better when design, and I'm talking about at a higher level, governance approvals that cut across community sectors. And I don't think this study will be alone in that context, So I think we need to think about some of the regulatory requirements in the context of not just hospitals and healthcare settings and clinics, and how that can be streamlined in the future. But that's bigger than us, but it's certainly something that needs to get addressed because these studies won't happen. And as Kate said, these were people who had a lot of things going on. They had an existing disability of some description, and often that was quite a significant disability on their life. So a tough one for them.
So the governance requirements, as important as they are, actually work against this sort of trial, don't they? And because it adds time and expense of which we don't have as researchers.
We could finish on a positive though, Phil. We could salvage something from this trial. What do you want to talk about that, Kate?
Yeah, I'm excited about this, and it's something we'd planned to do from the start. But I get to speak with these participants again in the new year and have some conversations in an informal interview style to get their experience of what it's like to have a UTI, to get their experience of catheterizing. And we will interview all of the participants that we had involved for this trial. We'll get their thoughts. We will publish these results and just get a little bit more insight into the people behind the numbers.
And that can just be very powerful for future pieces of work. And so I think it's going to be a really important piece of work that will come still from this.
Major lesson you've learned from this?
Don't be too optimistic.
Fair enough. Kate, any major lesson, do you think?
I mean, I would say have more backup options from the very beginning and just always plan for the unexpected.
Well, look, good on both of you for trying as hard as you did to get this study going and completed, and sympathies and empathy for the fact that it didn't. But this is a good example. This is a life example. This is what happens in the real world of research, isn't it? Not every trial gets up and is successful. And, a lot of trials have negative results, which you sometimes don't hear about. So I think this is a good podcast for people to hear about a trial that didn't get up when it looked, when it's an important trial, it had funding, it was led by a good research team, but for all those practical, logical reasons that we've spoken about today, just couldn't carry through. So to Kate and Brett, any final words?
We're still going.
and I agree, Phil, all that, exactly what you said. This is the challenge of doing these types of studies. And I think it's good just to be able to talk about it and get people to understand what some of the complexities are behind these things. But the other thing I'd say, as much as I'm disappointed, and Kate, ultimately, we're not the ones who are self-catheterising and getting UTIs. So I'm not upset about, personally, okay. But for me, it's more gutted for the fact we wanted to do this to help people. And that's the whole reason I am involved in infection prevention and control and research, is to make a difference to patient outcomes or consumer outcomes. And we couldn't do it for these people. And that's probably what hurts the most for me. That's not to say it will never happen again. That's for sure.
And we still don't know the answer to the question.
I still don't know the answer to the question. And it could be a massive impact for, or may not, for lots of people. So, and just one other thing, the crossover design, maybe that's something we'd reflect on in the future, because the crossover design did require us to have that long follow-up. And, but as Kay alluded to, the advantage of that is everyone did get the intervention, would have got the intervention at some point. But maybe for these trials, we need to be thinking about a parallel RCT, just so that it's a bit more feasible to do and perhaps not as long. And maybe we could have recruited a few more if it was a 6-month trial or something like that. But anyway.
Perhaps we'll see that in the future. So all credit to you both, Kate, Brett, for your efforts. Thank you for joining us on Infection Control Matters today. And we'll say farewell for now. So thank you.
Thanks, team.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Kate.